everything else going. So as we're waiting for Facebook to notify everybody that we're here and that we're live, Karen, welcome to Warwick's. Hello.
Thank you. Thank you for asking me.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're here. And Laura, thank you for being here with us and doing this interview.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm so excited to get to chat with Karen again.
I know it's going to be a great conversation. Can't wait. New series, all kinds of good stuff to talk about here. So, but while we're letting people know who we are, I mean, that we're here and the Facebook's knocking on their door and saying, hey, we're live. Just a couple of quick things about Warwick's. For though we were talking in the green room a little bit about, for those that don't know, Warwick's is located in La Jolla, San Diego, California. Karen, you are calling in from Florida right now, I believe, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And Laura, you're in Austin, did you say?
Yes. Hello from Austin.
Hello from Austin. So we have kind of the South covered, but across the country, but hopefully we'll have some caller or some people watching from all over the country, maybe even outside the country. So with that though, unfortunately, we don't ship outside the country, but for those of you that are inside the US, I'm going to be chatting with you in the comment section of Facebook on how to order the book from Warwick's. If you're here in San Diego, we'd love for you to stop by and pick up the book. There are tons of other wonderful things to see at Warwick's, and we always love seeing you at the store. But we do have, just click on that link and we can ship that book to you as well. In that comment section, we will be doing any questions that you have. Karen and Laura are going to talk for about 35-ish minutes, and then I'll bring your questions in. So if you got any burning questions, or even if they're not burning questions, don't be shy. Pop those into the comment section and we'll bring those into the conversation to them. So with that, I think we've given Facebook enough time to let everybody know we're here. So let me introduce these two lovely authors and then I'll go away for a little while. So Karen Rose is the award-winning #1 international best-selling author of more than 25, yes, you heard me correctly, novels, including the best-selling Baltimore and Cincinnati series. She has been translated into 23 languages, and her books have been placed on the New York Times, the Sunday Times UK, and Germany's Der Spiegel best lists. She's here today to talk about her latest book in a brand new series called Cold-Blooded Liar, the San Diego Case Files. This is the #1. Can't wait to hear it. Being San Diego, cannot wait to hear about all this. And joining her is Laura Griffin. Laura is the New York Times and USA Today bestselling author of also more than 25 books and novellas. She is a 2-time Rita Award winner, as well as a recipient of the Daphne du Maurier Award. So with that, ladies, have a great conversation. I'll see you in a little while.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was a nice introduction. Well, I also am so excited to hear about this book. I confess that I just read it on the airplane and I thought I was going to get a nap in, but I didn't. I just kept turning the pages. It was one of those that you're not going to be able to stop reading as soon as you start. So one of the things I loved about it was the setting. I love San Diego as one of my favorite cities. And so one of the first questions I have is, how did you choose the setting? I know that you set a lot of books in different places around the country, and this is a whole new series that's launching in San Diego. So how did you make that choice?
I've normally in the past, I've picked cities that I know pretty well, whether I've lived there, I have family there. And I'm going to be living on the West Coast. We're moving to the West Coast and we have family in San Diego. So that just seemed like a real fun, and I've been there once before. It was lovely. Absolutely. I mean, I don't know that you all have a bad day in San Diego. It's such beautiful weather all the time. So my husband and I were talking about the series, and I said, I want a new one. I want to set it on the West Coast. He said, how about San Diego? We can ask my cousin all kinds of questions. So that was why I picked it. And it turned out I actually knew a lot more people than I thought who lived in San Diego. So I did get some help with some of the landmarks, et cetera. But I'm hoping to spend a lot more time there now that I'll be on that side of the country.
Well, it's a great choice for a setting because you kind of have a little bit of everything. You've got the water, the ocean, you've got, mountains not too far away. You've got kind of some arid landscape. I mean, you kind of have, as far as settings go, and as a suspense writer, I think about this as, where can I set a murder? Where can I set a crime? You've got all kinds of endless possibilities for some really fun shenanigans that could happen for your characters.
Well, and there's also, you're right near the border. You've got the coast, the naval station there, and so there are so many different aspects. And San Diego County is huge. I didn't realize how big of a city it was. It's like the third largest city in California. So it didn't feel that big to me when I was there. So, but Wikipedia would not lie on this. So
Yes.
I trust that it is true.
Well, I'm excited to read more set in this setting. So one of the things I loved about the story is the two main characters. They were a little bit different than I've read in a lot of romantic suspense. Kit is the detective, and of course she's very strong and she's very smart. And the hero is Sam, and he is a criminal psychologist or a psychologist that works with criminals. How would you say would accurately
Right
describe
now,
him?
he's a psychologist that works with criminals, although
Okay.
his goal, and,
Mhm.
and I don't want to spoil anything. His goal is to be a criminal psychologist with the police department, to kind of be,
Mhm.
to do profiles. That's his,
Well,
that's
in the story, you kind of talk about why he chose that field and why it's suited for him. So, I won't give that away, but it was really interesting to me that that's his job and that's what he chose. And he's not overbearing. Like so many heroes that you read in fiction are just, sometimes they can be a little bit overbearing and kind of, he was a little bit more, it was a different character that I've read in a long time. And I thought it was very refreshing. How did you kind of get into his head and kind of develop him as a character?
he was just a nice guy, and when I started thinking about him, he was actually the first character that came to mind. I knew Kit was going to be the homicide detective. I knew she was going to be kind of a prickly pear, but I really had not thought that much about her. It was really Sam was the first character I really considered. And my husband was a mental health therapist many, many years ago. And he stopped doing that because somebody tried to kill him. There's a lot of danger that goes along with many of these kinds of professions that deal with criminals, whether they're providing therapy to criminals. And Sam feels a little of that. He, at one point, the cold-blooded liar that he's talking to gets very threatening. And, and so there's a danger element to it. Social workers, you're going into someone's home who has been accused of doing terrible things to their family. So, right off the bat, there's a sense of danger there. And Sam is aware of it. And it's important for him to do the right thing. He is there for all the right reasons. And he's just this really nice guy. I was just, every time I turned around, I was like, oh my gosh, he's so nice.
Well, and he and Kit are so different in their personalities, and yet somehow they mesh really well. Of course they start out with a lot of friction, but their personalities do mesh, and you can see how it comes together, but it just was a little bit surprising because they're so different.
They are different. And
Do you like to write the opposites attract kind of stories?
I do, but I think this was a little bit different for me. Most of the time, my characters don't dislike each other at the beginning. And in this particular story, Kit, well, and it's not a huge spoiler. I think it actually says it on the jacket blurb. For a little while, Sam's a suspect.
Mm-hmm.
Although Kit doesn't want to believe he's a suspect, and that really bothers her about herself. Because she sees his picture, she sees his face, there's something about him, before she's even met him. She doesn't want him to be a bad guy. She wants him to be a good guy. And that makes her take a step back because she's not accustomed to that. She's, again, she's a prickly pear. She's a hard person to get to know, and she doesn't trust easily. So, the wall that she builds is, that's because of her upbringing, and it's not surprising. Sam's the opposite. He's had this warm family. He's had some bad knocks. He's had some traumatic things happen to him in his life, but he's generally just a very easygoing, laid back guy. He loves giving back to the community. He admires her because she does too. In their own ways, they're both very giving. So they have that in common. And she admires that about him too, even as she's supposed to think that he's a suspect.
Well, I was with Kit because I kept hoping that she wasn't going to be wrong about it. I warmed up to Sam immediately, and I just didn't want him to be one of those, masked villains where at the end, but anyway. So when you're choosing a new city, I noticed that all of your different series are set in different cities, and it's kind of the thread that ties the different books together thematically. How did you decide on that theme for your stories? Some people do other themes.
It wasn't on purpose.
Oh, it
Um,
was an accident, huh?
Kind of an accident. Yeah. When I first started writing, and my first book came out, we were talking about it earlier, came out 20 years ago this July. And it was set in Chicago. At the time I was living in Cincinnati, but we had family. We have family in a lot of places. So we have family in Chicago. We would do the drive for, Easter, Thanksgiving, all the important, but not Christmas holidays. Christmas, we'd always go home to the East Coast, to Baltimore. And so we would go to Chicago, and I thought, I want to set it in a city that's not my city, that is a place where someone could get lost if they wanted to get lost. And Chicago is a really perfect city for that. So I picked Chicago. The next book I wrote it while I was living in North Carolina. I wrote part of it. So that one's set in North Carolina, but I found myself drawn back to Chicago. And there were all these people that I had, had in the story. I wanted to tell their story too. So it kind of just grew from there. And I could have stayed in Chicago for a long time, except I met a woman at work. I was a school teacher at the time. And she was from North Jersey, across the river from Philly. And her last name's Ciccatelli. And she had this large family. And I took her out to dinner one night and I said, "Tell me about your family." And as she starts talking, I start seeing this whole series, whole family. And that became my first book really outside of Chicago, out of that first one. And after that, I picked, I picked Minnesota because I had friends that lived there that said, "You could come and visit us for a book signing." And I said, "It'll be February." And they're like, "No, don't worry. We're like hardy people. We'll go out in the snow." And of course, there was a really big snow the night before. So we nearly got snowed in at the bookshop. And I think there are a lot worse places to get snowed in than a bookstore.
In a bookshop, yes.
Baltimore was because I lived there.
Yes.
Cincinnati was because I lived there. And then I started writing with a writing group, and they're in Northern California on the coast. And so I started coming to California a lot, and I met some folks in Sacramento. That's where the Sacramento series came from. And then my most recent one, other than the San Diego, my most recent series, and I will be doing 2 series a year. So the summer series is set in New Orleans. And I picked that because I was honestly thinking research fun, research trips, research for food, research for Mardi Gras. And then the pandemic hit. And I was like, "Don't." I only got to take my first research trip just like 2 months ago, after all this time. So I'm like on book 3, and I'm just now getting to, I'd been there for a tourist, but I'd never been there to research. I just knew it was. So there's really it's not a dartboard approach, but there is definitely a family factor to it. But New Orleans was just fun.
Well, when you go on a research trip, like you're describing, now that the pandemic's over, we can all, freely move about the cabin again. What do you like to do when you go to a new city and you're trying to kind of get ideas for your story? What do you like to do?
Well, I usually try to have somebody who lives there to take me around. When I did Sacramento, one of my friends, another writer, Amy Lane, lives there. And I said, "Would you drive me around?" Well, we got in a family minivan. She's driving me around, showing me all the different, the different sites that she thinks are important, as a local, and, having lived there for years. I said, "Well, where's the FBI building? I'd like to see where it is." So we actually go and we sit in the parking lot, and that's when we notice the camera. And I'm like, I think you're now on FBI's, their
You're
video.
casing the joint.
She goes, "Oh no." And I'm like, "Well, we aren't doing anything wrong. We're just sitting here," but we left. So hopefully there were no ramifications. But, I like to experience the food. And what I'll do before I go is I like to know where people live. I like to see the neighborhoods. So I'll pick, Zillow is wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll say, "That's the house, that's their house." And then sometimes I'll just go to that neighborhood and drive around just to kind of orient myself with how it feels.
Yeah.
So research it can be food, it can be fun, but there's a lot of, where are things? How long does it really take to get from here to there? Where are all the places to hide the bodies? That's important question.
That's great. Yeah, I love research too, especially, just when you have a local to kind of guide you around, you learn so much more than just, going by yourself. So it's good that you have family all over the place.
And there was one time I was in Minnesota, and this was one of the trips where I think I'd gone there to sign books. And my oldest friend and her husband live there, and he is a doctor, and he has helped me either kill or save many people over the years. It's an emergency room doctor. And he said, what can we show you when you come? And I was like, can you get me into the morgue? Because you can't just like knock on the door and say,
Yeah.
I want a tour. He said, I'll do my best. So he actually got me a visit to the morgue. And it was definitely a memorable day, because I thought I was going to get like a half an hour. All I wanted to see was the lab, to see if it looked like it did on Quincy, it did. And Quincy really wasn't that far off. But my friend, the doctor, and the medical examiner hit it off. We spent 4 hours in the morgue that day.
Oh, how wonderful.
Yeah. And it was a lot more. I mean, I saw an autopsy, which I had explicitly said I don't really want to see, but God, I was there. They were having such fun.
There you are.
There was. It's like, oh, so, and that was again a very memorable, shocking.
I bet it was. Yes.
Experience, because I had never seen a dead person outside of a casket and outside of a funeral before. And but they were like, oh, we forgot. Not everybody, has the same, familiarity with.
Well, if you're going to write about it,
Yes. So, it's always nice to have a local who can just kind of take you around. Yeah.
And I noticed that all of your series are in the United States, but you travel internationally a lot. And I know you said, I guess I read in an interview that you like to travel, other parts of the world. Have you thought about setting a suspense series in a foreign country before?
I have.
And if you did, where would you choose?
I would think if I did, I would probably choose London, because I know it the best. But again, you have that. I've never set one in New York, for example. I have characters from New York, and they might go to New York, but there's a culture to the city that I think to be authentic, you have to spend a lot more time than I've spent there just as a tourist. And for example, California, before I started visiting, I thought it was all San Francisco and LA, and it's not. I mean, the place where we spend summers there, and that place has no cell phone service for miles and hours. You could drive, and there are places you could drive for hours and never pass another living soul.
Well, that can be really helpful if you're writing a mystery, because sometimes the cell phone thing, it can help your plot, but it can also make it challenging because everybody can communicate instantly at all times, and it takes away some of your plot devices.
Exactly. And it does. And people are like, oh, that doesn't. Yeah, it really does. When I'm in California, when I walk out my front door, we have Wi-Fi, so we can make phone calls through the Wi-Fi, but we walk out the door, go halfway up the driveway, and there's nothing. So, we just hope that you have an emergency that's closer to the house, because otherwise, you're kind of stuck. But yeah, the driving around, the understanding, the feel of it just feels different. And I don't know that I would want to do a really good job. So if I did, I would need to be there longer than I am when I'm a tourist, and just going to see, Buckingham Palace.
Visit. Yeah.
Yes. To actually, ride the tube during rush hour when people are going to work, and what's that like? And, going to a corner market every day because you don't, maybe you don't have a big fridge or something like that.
So where do you get your story ideas? I'm not talking about the setting, but just the plot and the things that, kind of the kernel of the idea that sets the story in motion.
Well, I mean, I'm sure it's the same with you. It's different for every book. Sometimes it's something somebody says, and sometimes it's a snippet that I've heard on the news or I've read in an article that just kind of sticks with me. Every now and again, there are kernels of personal experience with the San Diego series, because Sam is a psychologist, and there's a difference. I think most people know psychologists can't prescribe meds and psychiatrists can, because they go to medical school. That's a big difference between them. But another difference is that psychiatrists are protected legally by patient-doctor confidentiality, but psychologists don't have that. Now, on one hand, they can't share what they're not given permission to share, because they could lose their license, and they could be civilly liable. They could be sued in civil court by their client. But the judge will say, tell me what I want to know. So often that's happened to my husband a couple of times when he was in that job, that, the judge demanded information. He says, I can't tell you that without my client's permission. And it puts a psychologist in a really in a tight spot sometimes, because they are not legally protected in the same way psychiatrists are. And that's where Sam's story came from.
Mhm.
It was,
Okay.
and I was a little surprised to find out that if you've committed a murder 20 years ago and you tell your therapist, they can't tell anybody because that's protected. And this becomes Sam's dilemma, because the only time he can tell is if there's a duty to warn. And duty to warn means your client is saying something indicating that a living person is at risk of harm, either death or injury or something, and you are then required to tell. And if it's a minor, that makes everything, then you're a mandatory reporter. So with Sam, he's in this position where his client is a liar. He's a pathological liar. He doesn't know what he's saying is true and what's false, except sometimes he hears little threads of things that could be true. It could be murder. And if it was a murder that happened 5 years ago, he couldn't say anything, but he thinks it's a murder that's going to happen soon. And he knows he has to do something. He knows he has a duty to warn. So that's how Sam kind of gets involved in this whole case. So that some of that came from conversations with my husband about what he was allowed to say, what he wasn't allowed to say, when he was a therapist. And, so again, the very real danger that therapists, especially court-ordered, court mandatory therapy for people who've done some pretty bad things, and then they're exposed to the therapist, and the therapist is in the same room with them. And it can be scary.
Yeah, it was a really interesting moral dilemma in the story that kind of kicked off the plot. So I have a question about past books. Have you ever killed off a beloved character, one of the favorites, and what kind of reaction did you get from your readers?
Well, I've killed off many that my editors wouldn't let stay dead. And because I don't write paranormal, I had to find a way to not kill them in the first place versus letting them come back as something else, which would have been handy in a few of the situations. There was one that I killed off, and I don't do it often. I don't kill off the beloved characters because I don't like to do it. And sometimes I think, oh, that person's going to die. And then I come to like them, and then I can't kill them. It's kind of like my father was a teenager, he raised bunnies for food, but then he fell in love with all the bunnies and he couldn't kill them. And so he had to give them away as pets. So it's kind of like that. I'm like, I kind of now have fallen in love with this person. I can't kill them. So then so many characters live for that reason. I have killed off a few. Then my editors said no, they could have their own story someday, and a couple of them did.
So the editor threw them a lifeline.
Oh yes, my editors have had very soft hearts, and why do you have to kill this person? I said, because if they don't die, X, Y, and Z. All right, okay. And then they're like, but sometimes they say no, this person must live. This person could be a hero or a heroine someday, and that has happened.
If you did manage to do it in your story, what was the reaction from readers?
They were upset. They were upset. And sometimes, and again, if you do it right, you could have a victim not even be a fan favorite or a reader favorite, just be real enough that they resonate with readers. And when that person dies, the reader has a very big, which is what you want. We want that.
You want the big reaction.
There was a character, and I still hear about this one. There was a character back in, I think it was my 4th book. And she's gets off the L train in Chicago in the middle of the night. And she's kind of looking, it's not a great neighborhood, but it's not terrible. She's walking home. She's wearing Winnie the Pooh scrubs. Well, she's a nurse, probably a pediatric nurse. And she gets killed, and I still hear from readers about first of all, I didn't do it. But it makes a difference when there's emotional connection, and sometimes it doesn't take a lot. A nice doctor who gives his extra pay to buy prescriptions for needy kids, and he wears some kind of glasses, and then they find his glasses later and know he's dead. Little things like that. And but readers have, the one thing they really got on me about though was in my second book, and I knew not to do this again, ever again, not even a whisper of it ever again. The heroine had 2 German shepherds.
I knew you were going to say that.
She was only
Something
supposed to have
about the dog.
one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't harm the pets. But
Yes.
she had 2 German shepherds. She was only supposed to have one, but they were identical. So she would walk them separately
Mhm.
so that the management would think she only had one.
Okay.
Well, then the villain also only thought she had one dog, and he only brought enough poison for one dog, but both dogs ate it. So both got sick, but neither died. They were fine at the end. And I'm so glad you didn't kill the dogs. I'm thinking, killed and dismembered cheerleaders. I mean, but the dogs are okay. So yeah, I learned the hard way, and like I
Yes.
said, you didn't kill them. They were just injured. So you can't injure.
Mhm.
No,
Yeah.
nothing happened to the pets. And I find myself doing that, too. It's like that movie,
Yeah.
can't watch it.
Yeah.
The animal's going to be okay. I can watch it.
So I read in an interview that you like to get on an airplane with a romance novel because it's a good distraction.
Hmm.
Do you
Well,
have a fear of flying, or is it just you're trying to pass the time, or what?
Well, I used to, and I don't have this, I still don't like to fly. It's still, the whole experience makes me uncomfortable, but I used to be very afraid. I mean, like, I'd have terrors.
White knuckle.
Yes. And I started reading to pass the time.
Mhm.
And then what ended up happening was one time it was a shuttle flight. It was like one of those little 12-seater Learjets.
Yeah.
And our company this is when I was an engineer, our company had leased them to go back and forth to the manufacturing plants, because it was a lot cheaper to keep those little planes going than to coordinate, 15 round trip tickets for a bunch of people who had to go, because we were always going back and forth to the plant. Well, on the way back, and I was the only woman on the plane, I remember that. And there were 4 people in my little area, 4 people in the front, towards the front of the plane, and then the 2 pilot and co-pilot. We had heard a really big noise, which you're not supposed to hear at 30,000 feet. And we had plane trouble. Long story short, we had plane trouble. The battery had overheated, and they ended up landing with like 0 power. They had to turn the power off on the
Oh
plane.
my gosh.
And it was a couple minutes that were white knuckled. And I remember thinking I had a romance novel, and it was, oh gosh. Oh, I never thought her name is like right at the tip of my tongue. Old, like more old-fashioned historical romance. It's like a guy in a kilt, on the front.
Yeah.
And I kept thinking, if I'm gonna die, if I lose it, we don't die, I will never hear the end of it from any of these men. So if I'm gonna die, I might as well go out reading a romance novel. So I was, reading, and I had it stuck, because back then you would get really, you get made fun of a lot. So I actually had it stuck in a technical manual, so it looked like I was, and we clearly didn't die, and that became my good luck.
And do you still like to read romance?
Yes. Oh, that's all I read.
Reading anything right now that you could recommend?
Let's see. I have let's see. One of the new books, I like paranormal. So I really do like magic. I love the, dragons and shifters, and I love all that. There's one coming out, by Brian Feehan. And I think it's called Harmony. Oh, I should have had that ready. Can I come back to that question?
Sure. Yes.
I need to come back to that one, because I want to recommend it, but I think it's called Harmony of Fire or something like that.
Okay.
Let me look really fast. Brian Feehan. It is Harmony of Lies. Harmony of Lies. So that's the one I'm going to be reading next. And I think it just came out. So it's going to be like next to my.
Do you have like a to be read stack, or is it on your e-reader, or?
It's on my e-reader only. And I would love to be able to read books, but I had eye surgery 10 years ago and they messed it up. So I can't read print anymore. So I am very, very grateful every day that there are e-readers, and that every book is now available, because if it had been 20 years ago, not every book was available.
Yeah.
an e-format back then. So yeah, I'm very grateful to this wonderful, wonderful e-reader thing. So they're all on my phone.
That's great. And it's easier to travel that way. I used to
Definitely.
just load up my carry-on bag with books, and now I just take my e-reader. So it's much easier.
Well, that's why I started writing, was because I was traveling all the time and I
Mhm.
couldn't carry enough books.
Yeah.
Because I would run out, and I would be gone sometimes for 2 weeks at a time.
So you
And
started writing stories because you had run out of the stories to read? Oh,
yes,
that's wonderful.
yes, in my hotel room. And because I did most of the time I didn't speak the language well enough to
Mhm.
enjoy television. The only
Mhm.
thing on TV back then that was English speaking was CNN International, and it was all about plane crashes and war.
The
I'm
last
like,
thing you
"I
want to
don't wanna
read.
watch this and go to sleep." So I started
That's
writing.
great. That's great. And what is your writing process like? Is it the same every day, or do you vary it up, or how, what's
Oh
your
no,
process?
I would. Is yours the same every day?
Well, it's the same when I'm in the same place. Like when I'm at home in my house, it's the same. If I'm traveling, it's different. So,
Well, I envy people who have the same. I wish I could do that, but my brain doesn't work that way. And I write in the nighttime.
oh,
Like my brain wakes up when the sun goes down. I really get
okay.
a lot done during the winters because there's all this
That's great.
nighttime.
I love hearing that. So often I talk to people and they're like, "Oh, I get up at 4 in the morning and have that extra quiet hour while the house is asleep." And I'm like, I can't even imagine getting up so
No, no,
early.
I do my best writing between like midnight and 6 a.m.
Oh my gosh.
Then I
Okay.
roll into bed, and then the whole world wakes up, unfortunately, when you're trying to sleep. But
And what is your writing snack or beverage? Do you drink a lot of coffee if you're up in the middle of the night like that?
well, I used to, and I used to drink a lot of Diet Coke, but
Uh-huh.
age happens. So now I drink a lot of water. If I'm on like a crazy deadline, I will drink Diet Coke, but
Okay.
mostly it's cheddar cheese goldfish are my.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, my husband buys them by these big,
The
I think
big
gallon
pack.
cartons.
Yes. Oh, that's great. So if you referenced that you said you were an engineer before you were a writer. Okay, that's really interesting. I mean, that's, I've never met anyone who used to be an engineer and is now an author. That's interesting. If you
Well,
had to choose another profession besides being an author, and you could choose anything, what would you choose?
oh, I go back and be a teacher. I
Oh,
was
okay.
I was a
You missed the
teacher.
teaching?
Yeah, I was a high school teacher in between, and I really enjoy teaching.
Would
I
you
didn't
teach
like
writing or would you teach, math, science?
I would teach math.
Mhm.
Yeah, I taught in a small charter school, so we all doubled up, and I taught math, chemistry, physics, and I taught a section of creative writing. And honestly, that was the hardest class to teach.
Really?
Much rather teach math than writing, because writing, I know how to do it.
Mhm.
It's really hard to teach it, you know?
Yeah.
I really enjoyed being a math teacher. I always thought I wanted to be a chemistry teacher, but when I actually became one, I enjoyed the math more.
So high school age, that
Mhm.
age group, have you ever written for that age group? Middle
I
grade or
haven't. No, I haven't. And I think I would try, and then lots of people would die, and it would be because I
oh,
can't not murder
yeah,
people.
yeah.
Once you start, you can't stop.
Yeah. Yes, I hear you. Um, what is something that your readers would maybe be surprised to know about you? Like I was surprised to learn that you used to be in engineering. That kind of blows my mind because I don't know any other writers that have that background. But what would something readers might be surprised to learn about you?
I do not watch horror movies, and I don't necessarily like the really scary thriller movies. I don't like to. I like to scare other people. I like to be scared
You
myself.
don't
I
like
have
the tables to be turned.
Yeah, I have really bad dreams when I watch those, and
Okay.
they'll last for years. So yeah, I'm careful about what images
Okay.
I let
Well, what
into.
about reading horror stories? Really scary. Can you read it but not watch it on TV?
I can read it because I think
Okay.
my mind is generating enough of the pictures. I think it's
Yeah.
overload when I see the pictures in there. Yeah, I can read it, and I do sometimes do read it. But I can always, and you could do this with a movie too, I guess, but I can put the book away for a little while and go take a walk and then come back and open it up again. I guess you could do that with a movie, but for some reason,
Yeah.
and I had somebody who her mouth just fell open. She goes, "What? You don't?" I'm like, no, I don't. She goes, "Isn't that a fraud?" And I was like, "Well, no."
And misrepresentation.
Yeah.
What is some of the best writing advice you've ever gotten?
I think the best writing advice I ever got, and this was after I had written maybe, let's see, 13 or 14 books. And you kind of get into a mindset, at least I did, where you feel like the next book has to be better, and then has to be
Oh, yes.
better. And you're always having to one up yourself. It's a competition with yourself. And my editor at the time, a wonderful woman, she said, each one doesn't have to be bigger and better. They just have to be as good as the last one, and they just have to make your readers happy. I was like, oh, and that took so much pressure.
Gave you a little bit of breathing room.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
To me, that turned me around.
Yeah. Hello.
Hi, Lauren. Do you have more? I didn't want to come in if you still have some burning questions, but we've got a lot of audience questions coming.
Oh, good. I would love to hear what the audience is wondering.
Okay, perfect. So great conversation. Oh my God, I was sitting back here like writing all kinds of notes, just like, oh, the morgue thing. So I think Anna and I have the same question about the morgue. Karen, hold on, let me scroll back to it. Does it smell as bad as they're written about?
Well, where I was, it didn't.
Okay.
I did get to go into the room that had all of the bodies waiting, and I remember seeing like all the toes. And at the time, this was like right as they were going from like an electronic, like almost like a US UPC
Right, code
scanner,
right.
They're going from the toe tags to more electronic, but these bodies still had the toe tags. And I remember that. I remember what, there was probably 5 or 6 bodies, and you just see the feet with the toes. I remember that.
Oh,
and I remember it smelled like a hospital. It didn't smell bad,
right.
But everybody that was going to be probably odoriferous was probably in the cooler,
right.
By that point.
Right.
But yeah, it was definitely, it made a huge impact. That visit, out of all of the research I've ever done, probably made the biggest impact on me.
I would imagine. I mean, because that's something that, you see in hospitals, it's just like people die all the time in hospitals, but it's kind of, it's so sheltered away from us on that particular part of what happens, that's spooky and fascinating. It's just,
The Emmy said to my friend, the ER doctor, she goes, why haven't you come down here earlier? You sent up most of our clients. And I'm just like,
what? Yeah, I mean, it is.
It's medical person. My eyes are really wide.
So when you watch were you watching it through like a glass thing when you were watching the autopsy?
Yeah, what had happened was that the two of them were talking, and I was just kind of trailing along in their wake. And they went up some stairs and into a room, and it was a observation suite.
Okay.
So the whole room, like one whole wall was glass, and you look down.
Yeah.
And they were doing the autopsy down there, and I remember the medical examiner completely, goggles, masked up and everything else. And I remember there was a cop, and he was standing next to the table. He wasn't wearing any kind of protective gear, and he stood there with his hands clasped behind his back, in that kind of that spread, that spread stance that they have, the spread foot stance. And it was like he was on guard. And it was almost like, but it was, on guard is the wrong word. He was there for the victim.
Yeah. Okay.
He was there. He was observing, but he was there for the victim. And it was a particularly gruesome body. And at the way that the body was kind of laying on the table, I couldn't see the head. And the worst words came out of my mouth was, "Oh my God, did you cut off her head?" And my friend who was the ER, that's when one of my friends came over and started pounding on my back, because I had stopped breathing. I had just gone sheet white, like I was going to pass out. It was such a shock. And he came up, he goes, "Oh, no, it's there. It's fine. It's just like," it was kind of at an angle. And it was a very gruesome, he said, for my first autopsy and my only autopsy, it was a very gruesome death that the woman had been subjected to. And I read about it in the newspaper the next day, the story of it. She was my age. And I think a lot of it just made it made it a very personal experience. And I think that the people giving me the tour felt that I told, don't feel bad because it's an amazing experience, but I think that they felt a little bad that they forgot that not everybody in the party was as accustomed to it as they were.
Right. Man, that is amazing. But I'm not sure that there are many authors that have had that experience in their researching. Just saying. That's
it was definitely unintentional. The only thing I wanted to see was the lab.
Yeah.
I just wanted to see if Quincy did it right.
Yeah. Oh man. Oh, that's an amazing story. Okay, let's get to some other. So Arlene is on here and we're going to jump around because they were popping in these questions when you all were having like your talk about different things. So these are going to kind of bring back some of the other parts of the conversation. So Arlene, she loves the idea of using Zillow to select the house and location to scope out for the story. Have you ever heard from a reader commenting that a story seemed to hit very close to home through the description, etc.?
That would be so fun if it happened, but it's never happened to me.
Wouldn't that be great? It's like, hey, were you writing about my house?
Actually, there is a little piece of in Cold-Blooded Liar where I take there's something that I say is in San Diego and it's not. It was actually in Cincinnati when I lived there, and it's the fact that Sam recognizes the description of a place that this client of his is talking about because he can smell strawberries. And I say that there's a flavor making factory nearby. Well, when I lived in Cincinnati, there was a flavor making factory along the highway. And when they made that strawberry flavor I worked for Procter & Gamble, and that was Duncan Hines back in the day. When they made the strawberry flavor for Duncan Hines cakes, everybody would it didn't matter what time of year it was, roll your window down. And then the next week they'd be making like meat and cheese. And
Close one.
So I use that as a, and then the name of the park was Longview, and that's the name of the street that the factory was in. So that wasn't in San Diego. So if somebody says, oh, that happened to me in Cincinnati. Yeah,
that's where it happened. Yeah. We have our flower fields. We have our strawberry fields up the coast a little bit. So we probably have a little bit of that smell that happens. So Christine says here that she's watching 2 of her favorite authors. So
hi, Christine.
Thanks, Christine. Okay, let's see. Melissa would like to know from Laura, when is your next book set to come out?
Oh, actually, in a couple weeks, I have a book coming out. It's called Deep Tide, and it's book 4 in my Texas Murder Files series. So I'm just after Karen.
So is it set? Is it on the coast in Texas?
This one is on the coast. Yes, it's a fictional island off the Texas coast called Lost Beach, and I've set several stories there, and so I'm returning to this setting, which I love. I love doing coastal stuff. So,
are there characters that come in that are the same characters?
Yeah, the characters overlap from story to story. So people that have read the previous books will kind of see some familiar faces. But I'm like Karen. I like to have the story arcs, the plot kind of stand alone, so that if someone hasn't been reading your series, they can jump in. Yes. And they'll be able to pick up, the characters and what's going on. It's not like you have to have read every single one to understand.
I think that's important, because I think especially today, you could get things out of your readers a little bit easier, but print stuff, it's hard to, sometimes you don't know if some of the other stuff that's way back is still in print. And so that's a really good thing to have, where you don't have to, but then if you're intrigued, you can go back and have lots of things to read after the fact, which is great. Okay, Anne would like to know, Karen, how long does it take you to write a typical book?
Well, again, it varies. Cold-Blooded Liar was one of those I consider a gift, because it was under a month. And once I started, once I got the story, it just flowed like water. But I had one that took me a year to write. Not a whole year, but I'd write it and then I had to put aside, and I'd write it and I'd do something else and kept coming back to it. But most of the time they take about 2 to 3 months.
Okay. Wow. And especially if you're writing 2 in a series, 2 in a year, you got to keep it going.
Exactly. But this last one, it was just, like I said, it was a gift. When those happen, you're just thankful to the universe.
Were you almost feeling like you couldn't write fast enough when it came that quickly?
Yes. Yeah. and that's fun.
Yeah.
I mean, they talk about runner's high, which I swear I've never had, because like I only run if something's chasing me.
Right.
But there's a writer's high, I think, when
Mhm.
when I don't know if you've experienced this, Laura, but you get in that zone, and it is just such a rush when it
Yes.
all comes together, and you're writing as fast as your little fingers go.
Yeah. And you're like the next morning, it's like, get up and just go. Okay. And Anne would also like to know what you taught when you were teaching.
I taught math at various levels. I taught pre-calculus all the way down to the math for the kids who were at risk, at risk for not graduating. I taught reading, I taught chemistry and physics, and I taught creative writing.
Wow.
You were
Wow.
like a one-woman school.
I was just going to say that covers a lot of territory.
We had a couple biology teachers, and we had several math teachers that would teach other kinds of math, like geometry and algebra and things like that. But yeah, it was fun. I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
My daughter didn't enjoy it very much because she was in my class one year. So
Yeah.
that was hard being in your mom's class. But
I know my daughter's a teacher and she teaches high school math. And I said, why don't you teach, her kids, she's just a little teeny babies right now. But I said, why don't you teach at the high school by your house? And she's like, I just wouldn't want my kids to have to be at the
Hard.
school that their mom teaches at. Yeah, that's a hard one. This is a good question for both of you, but I think it's a lot. It really depends too. How long? So Laura, we'll start with you. How long are the books finished before they actually get published? So it's
I get
different.
that question a lot. Actually, for me, it's around a year, because the book that I give or take, the book I turn in the spring will be coming out next spring. And so the book, I'm doing edits on a book right now that I finished in the fall, and it's coming out in the fall. So the production cycle is kind of time consuming.
Right.
But
Karen, about the same for you, about a year?
And it used to be like every 9-month cycle.
Mm.
Now it's closer to a year. And a lot of that it's just the way the industry is set up now with printing and, all of that. So yeah, it's about a year.
Yeah. It's kind of a drag when you have people, it's like, they want those bucks. Let's go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Carolyn's got a question for you, Karen. And this one's kind of like picking a favorite child, I think, maybe, but it's not about your books. Have you lived in a lot of places, and what has been your favorite? So you got to be careful with this one, because you don't want to insult anybody on where they live.
I think I've lived a lot of places, and I've liked things about all of them.
Right.
But one of the things, when we don't spend summers in Florida, and we haven't for several years. I have a disability that when I get really hot, I get super sick. Like super, super sick. So Florida is really a bad place for me, which is why we're moving to the West Coast. But we spend time in California, Northern California, and it's right on the coast, and it's in the Mendocino area.
Oh.
And it's so beautiful there, because you're there with the cliffs and the crashing waves. We're in the redwood forest where we live. And there's a peacefulness and a quiet. And then I come back to Florida, and there's like people everywhere. It's like being in a video game. I think that my very favorite place to live is there on the California coast.
Yeah. And that coastline, driving the one, everybody in their lifetime needs to drive that coast
It's
from
beautiful.
Los Angeles up the
Yeah.
coast, because it's just stunning.
It's spectacular,
Yeah.
It's really spectacular. And it's a fun fact, because I'm a big Murder, She Wrote fan. The Murder, She Wrote was not filmed in Maine. Those all those crashing waves in that little town Cabot Cove, when they have like the airborne view of Cabot Cove, that's Mendocino, California.
Okay, did not know that. That's
Yes.
it. I love finding these fun facts out.
So I love to watch it, because we're like, oh, we know that place.
Yeah,
We've been-
I love it. Laura, have you lived in a bunch of places?
I actually have, I lived in Chicago, where Karen was talking about her first book, and I can
Mhm.
see why that is a city where you could get lost, because I did get lost in Chicago many times. Lived in Chicago. My husband and I lived overseas for a little while in Southeast Asia, and did a lot of travel writing, and lived in Tennessee, and now back to Texas, where I was born. So, and I love Austin, but I do love to travel. So, and we've been traveling a lot more now that thankfully COVID is over and we're getting back to our traveling. So that's been fun.
Yeah,
I have some
exactly.
family in
Travel
California,
books.
so I can relate to why you wanted to set a story in a series there, because it's so beautiful.
So do you write travel books, a travel blog?
No, I wrote back when I was living overseas. I was writing a travel blog and travel articles for a magazine, things like that. So,
Fun.
and I have set a few books in overseas settings. Like I had a series about Navy SEALs, and so they had some exotic settings where they were doing their missions, things like that. I lived in the Philippines for a while, and I've had fun setting a few stories there in the jungle, stuff like that. So, but I love, traveling. So it's you're kind of always going about it with an eye towards possibly setting a book somewhere. So
And having to go back for the research, right?
yes, exactly. And the food.
And the food. So Karen, you talked about the New Orleans series. So is that book coming in the fall, or when is
Well,
the?
the first book came out this past summer
Okay.
in 2022. That was
Okay.
book 1. Book 2 is coming out, and we just got the covers were just announced. It's called Beneath Dark Waters. It comes out in August of 23. And I'm getting ready to start the 3rd book. I'm in the starting phase of the 3rd book, which would be a summer 2024.
Got it.
book.
Okay. Yeah. New Orleans, like you said, I mean, can't beat the food, and what a place to, I love New Orleans. I love it there.
Yeah, we were there right before Christmas, and it was all decorated up, and
Oh, how pretty.
everything
Yeah.
just smelled so good.
Yeah. And at the very beginning, and for people who are watching right now, I think there was a little bit of a glitch with Facebook at the very beginning. So if you want to see the very beginning of the conversation, it'll be over on our YouTube channel. We're recording it. So you can pop over there to see the very beginning of this. So I'm not sure people heard Karen when she was talking about San Diego. And while we are the 3rd largest city in San Diego, you're right, it does not feel like it. It's not. Yeah, it's got a very small town sort of feel, especially our news.
I know, I subscribe. I've been watching. Yeah, it's that's one of the other things I do for research. I always subscribe to the local papers,
Right.
and that kind of thing. But yeah, to me, it almost feels like a Midwestern city.
Yeah,
but it's not.
But it's not. And we actually have a little bit of an identity crisis, and you kind of went over this too. It's like, are we a vacation destination? Are we a military town? Are we a biotech town? What are we exactly? So we have all this amalgamation of all kinds of different things that our identity is kind of all over the map a little bit. And I love, because even our weather, it's like they call them microclimates, but they kind of are, because we have like coastal, desert, mountain. I mean, and within this range, it's a very interesting little, I don't know. I've lived, so unlike you all, I've lived in California my whole life, basically LA and San Diego. So I don't have a lot to compare to. And Liana, I will end with your question. She wants to know if either of you will be going to Dallas anytime soon for a book signing.
Well, I'm not going to, but you're not that far away from there, are you, Laura?
I'm not far away from there. I'm only a few hours from Dallas. I don't have any lined up for this current release, but it's possible we might be doing one in the fall. So
There you go.
I'll keep you posted.
There you go. Watch it, which leads me to our final thing. Laura, for people who maybe don't follow you right now, do you have a website? Do you have a particular social media that you like to use? You want to let people know that?
Yep. I'm at www.lauragriffin.com, and then on Instagram, Laura Griffin author.
Perfect. And how about you, Karen?
KarenRoseBooks.com, because KarenRose.com was already taken.
Yeah.
So KarenRoseBooks.com, and I'm just Karen Rose Books wherever I go. I mean, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, it's all Karen Rose Books.
Perfect. All right, ladies, this was really fun.
This was so much fun.
Thank you for hosting.
Yeah, great conversation, and love to have you back. You have lots of books, so we'll love to have you back anytime y'all want to come back and talk with us. We'd love to have you.
I think I'm coming to
Thank
your
you.
store sometime in the end of March.
End of March. I think I think the Friday works a little better, but we're working on that. But yeah, we'll do a little bit of a stock signing with you at the end of March. So looking forward to it.
Congratulations, Karen. It's a great book. Everyone's going to love it.
Thank you. And then we'll be crossing fingers for, it's called Not Lost Tide. What was it?
Deep Tide. Deep Tide. Yep.
Deep Tide. Okay.
Thanks.
Lost Beach is the island. Yeah.
Here we go.
That's right. That's right.
Deep
All
Tide.
right. Deep Tide. All right, ladies, have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.